The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Victor Halden stormed across the factory floor. His expensive shoes clicked against the concrete, each step echoing through the sudden silence. Workers stopped mid-task, their hands frozen on machinery that had been humming moments before. I felt my stomach drop as he approached my workstation, a manila folder clutched in his manicured fingers. "Lauren Pierce," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice carried that fake authority he loved to display during investor visits. "You called in sick yesterday. That's negligence." My hands trembled as I set down my tools. Around me, my coworkers pretended to focus on their work, but I could feel their eyes darting between us. The air felt thick, suffocating. I had worked here for 6 years without a single complaint. 6 years of overtime, missed holidays, and perfect attendance records. Until yesterday. "Victor, I had a fever of 102, I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I sent the doctor's note to HR. I followed every protocol." He slammed the termination papers on my workbench. The sound cracked through the air like a whip. "You're done here. Security will escort you out." 10 minutes later, I stood outside the factory gates, clutching a cardboard box containing 6 years of my life. The security guard had stripped my ID badge with mechanical efficiency, avoiding eye contact as he followed Victor's orders. Behind me, the massive brick building of Harris Industrial Plastics stretched toward the gray sky, its smokestacks pumping yellowish clouds into the afternoon air. The smell hit me then. Sharp, chemical, wrong. It had been getting stronger over the past few weeks, but management kept saying it was normal production output. Standing here now, breathing it directly, my chest tightened. This wasn't normal. This was dangerous. I fumbled for my car keys, my hand still shaking from the humiliation. As I walked across the parking lot, I could see faces pressed against the factory windows. My former coworkers watched me leave, probably wondering if they were next. Victor had made an example of me, and the message was clear: loyalty meant nothing. One sick day, and you were disposable. But as I reached my car, something inside me hardened. Victor Halden had no idea what he had just unleashed. "My name is Lauren Pierce. I'm 31 years old, a single mother to 8-year-old Jake, and until yesterday, I was the most reliable quality control inspector at Harris Industrial Plastics. I had given that company everything. Nights when Jake asked why mommy had to work late again. Weekends spent at the factory instead of the park. Holidays when other families gathered while I monitored production lines. I sat in my beat-up Honda, staring at the termination letter. The reason listed was excessive absenteeism, which was laughable. I had taken exactly 3 sick days in 6 years. But Victor needed a scapegoat, and I had been convenient. The visiting investors were due next week, and nothing could look messy when money was on the line. My phone buzzed with a text from my babysitter asking if I was picking Jake up early. How was I going to explain this to him? How was I going to pay rent next month? The single mother's nightmare had become my reality in the span of 10 minutes. But underneath the fear and anger, something else was growing. A memory from last month, when I had tried to report a concerning leak to Victor himself. Victor Halden was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. Perfectly tailored suits, silver hair styled just so, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had bought Harris Industrial 5 years ago and immediately began cutting costs wherever possible. Maintenance budgets, safety training, equipment upgrades, everything was sacrificed for profit margins. The workers loved him at first. He threw company barbecues and called everyone family. But I had seen behind the mask during our monthly quality meetings. The way he dismissed safety concerns with a wave of his hand. The way he talked about workers like they were numbers on a spreadsheet. The way he smiled when announcing layoffs, like it was good news. Efficiency, he would say, that word rolling off his tongue like a prayer. We need to be more efficient. But efficiency in Victor's world meant cutting corners. And in a chemical processing plant, cutting corners could kill people. I had learned that lesson 2 months ago when I discovered something that still made my stomach churn. Something Victor had promised to fix but never did. 2 months earlier, I had been conducting my routine inspection of the chemical storage area when I noticed a discolored patch on the concrete floor. The smell was overwhelming, like rotten eggs mixed with nail polish remover. Following the trail, I found a hairline crack in one of the main containment pipes. A slow, steady drip of yellowish liquid was eating through the floor. I had documented everything properly. Photos, measurements, chemical readings. The leak was eating through the concrete and heading toward the storm drain system. That storm drain led directly to Miller Creek, where families brought their children to fish every weekend. When I brought my report to Victor, he barely glanced at the photos. "Lauren, you worry too much," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "These old pipes get minor leaks all the time. Maintenance will patch it up." But maintenance never came. Week after week, I watched that yellow stain grow larger. I filed follow-up reports that disappeared into Victor's office like messages in a bottle. The smell got worse. The concrete started crumbling. And still, nothing happened. Now I understood why. Fixing it properly would require shutting down production for days, maybe weeks. Victor couldn't afford that kind of delay, not with investors breathing down his neck. The public humiliation had been calculated and cruel. Victor waited until the afternoon shift change, when the factory floor was packed with workers. He had timed my termination perfectly, right during the monthly investor tour. As he fired me, I could see the group of suited visitors watching from the observation deck, nodding approvingly at his decisive leadership. "This is what accountability looks like," Victor announced to the gathered crowd, his voice projected just loud enough for the investors to hear. "At Harris Industrial, we maintain the highest standards of reliability and commitment." The irony was suffocating. He was lecturing about standards while hiding a toxic leak that violated every safety regulation in the book. He was talking about reliability while firing his most dependable employee for being sick. But the investors ate it up, probably seeing dollar signs as Victor demonstrated his willingness to make tough decisions. My coworkers stared at the floor as security escorted me out. I didn't blame them. They had families to feed and bills to pay. But their silence stung worse than Victor's betrayal. As the factory doors closed behind me, I made a decision that would change everything. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Jake's homework spread in front of me, but I couldn't concentrate on multiplication tables. My mind kept returning to that containment pipe and its slow, poisonous drip. Every day Victor delayed repairs meant more toxins seeping into the ground. More chemicals heading toward the creek where Jake and his friends played during summer break. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen, one of the maintenance technicians. Marcus had worked at Harris longer than anyone, nearly 15 years. He was one of the few people who knew about the leak because he had been the one Victor ordered to monitor the situation instead of fixing it. "Sorry about today," his message read. Victor's lost his mind. "But Lauren, that leak you reported? It's gotten worse. Much worse." My blood went cold. I called him immediately. "Marcus, how much worse?" His voice was barely a whisper. "The whole section of pipe is compromised now. It's not just dripping anymore. And the readings." He paused. "Lauren, if this gets into the water system, people are going to die." The magnitude of what Victor was hiding hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just negligence anymore. This was criminal. Marcus agreed to meet me at the old diner on Route 12, far from the factory and any prying eyes. He looked exhausted, his usually neat uniform wrinkled and stained. For 15 years, he had been the most conscientious worker at Harris Industrial. Now he looked like a man carrying the weight of a terrible secret. "I brought copies," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the sticky table. "Internal maintenance logs, inspection reports, chemical readings. All of it." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The documents painted a picture of systematic negligence that made my stomach turn. The leak had started small 3 months ago, but instead of immediate repairs, Victor had ordered temporary patches and falsified inspection dates. Each report showed escalating chemical concentrations, but the official logs reported normal levels. "Look at this," Marcus pointed to a report dated 2 weeks ago. "The toxin levels are 20 times the legal limit. This stuff causes liver damage, neurological problems, birth defects. And it's all heading straight for Miller Creek." The final document made my hands shake. It was a cost estimate for proper repairs, $200,000 and a 2-week production shutdown. In the margin, Victor had written in red ink, "Too expensive. Monitor only." He had chosen profits over people's lives. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could about environmental safety violations and whistleblower protections. My laptop never left the kitchen table as I dove deep into EPA regulations, OSHA requirements, and state environmental codes. Jake thought I was looking for a new job, and in a way, I was. I was looking for justice. The more I learned, the clearer my path became. The Environmental Protection Agency had an anonymous reporting system specifically designed for situations like this. They took chemical contamination seriously, especially when it threatened public water sources. But I needed more than just my word against Victor's. I needed irrefutable proof. That's when I remembered the restricted area around the leak site. Victor had cordoned it off with maintenance in progress signs to keep workers away, but he had never actually restricted access in the computer system. My old security badge might still work for another day or two before they deactivated it. I called Marcus. "I need to get back inside. Tonight." "Lauren, that's crazy. If they catch you." "People are drinking poisoned water, Marcus. Kids are playing in that creek. How many have to get sick before we do something?" There was a long silence. Then, "The night shift security guard is Tommy Rodriguez. He's a good man. I'll talk to him." At 2 a.m., the Harris Industrial parking lot was a wasteland of shadows and flickering streetlights. My hands were sweating as I approached the employee entrance, my old badge hidden in my palm. Marcus had texted that Tommy would look the other way for exactly 15 minutes, long enough for me to document what I needed and get out. The badge reader beeped green, and I slipped inside. The factory at night was a different world, humming machinery, dim emergency lighting, and the constant chemical smell that I now knew was slowly killing everything it touched. I made my way to the restricted area, my phone's camera ready. The scene was worse than I had imagined. The minor leak Marcus had described was now a steady stream of yellow-green liquid eating through the concrete floor. The temporary patches had failed completely, and the chemical was pooling in a depression that led directly to the storm drain. I could see the path it would take, straight to Miller Creek, then to the Willow River, then to the municipal water treatment plant. I documented everything. Photos of the leak, the failed repairs, the corroded pipes, and the path to the water system. Each image was timestamped and geotagged. This was evidence that even Victor's lawyers couldn't explain away. Back home, I uploaded the photos to 3 separate cloud storage accounts and printed physical copies. Then I sat down to write the most important letter of my life. It needed to be detailed enough to prompt immediate action, but careful enough to protect me from retaliation. I spent hours crafting each sentence, knowing that people's lives hung in the balance. To the Environmental Protection Agency, I began. "I am writing to report a critical environmental hazard at Harris Industrial Plastics, located at 1500 Industrial Drive. For 3 months, the facility has been concealing a major chemical leak that is contaminating local water sources. The attached evidence shows systematic negligence and deliberate cover-up by company leadership." I included Marcus's maintenance logs, my inspection photos, and a detailed timeline of Victor's refusal to address the problem. But I saved the most damning evidence for last, the cost estimate with Victor's handwritten note choosing profit over public safety. At the bottom, I added a simple line: "A corporation can fire a whistleblower, but they cannot silence the truth." I printed 3 copies. One for the EPA, one for the State Environmental Agency, and one for my insurance, just in case something happened to me. The next morning, I drove to 3 different post offices, mailing each report from a different location. I used fake return addresses and paid with cash. If Victor wanted to play dirty, I would protect myself accordingly. But I also did something else. I sent copies to investigative journalists at 2 major newspapers and the local TV station. The waiting was the hardest part. 4 days, nothing happened. I started to wonder if anyone would take the reports seriously, or if they would disappear into bureaucratic filing cabinets. Jake noticed my nervous energy and asked if I was okay. I hugged him tight and promised that everything would be fine, even though I wasn't sure it was true. Then, 5 days after I mailed the reports, my phone rang. Ms. Pierce? This is Agent Rebecca Torres with the EPA's Emergency Response Division. We received your anonymous report regarding Harris Industrial Plastics. We need to meet. My heart pounded so hard I could barely speak. Are you going to investigate? Ma'am, based on your evidence, we're launching an immediate environmental emergency response. Can you meet us tomorrow morning? The relief was overwhelming. Someone was finally going to stop Victor before more people got hurt. Agent Torres was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who wore determination like armor. We met at a coffee shop 20 miles from the factory, where she spread my evidence across a corner table like a general planning a battle. Her partner, Agent Kim, took notes as I explained everything I knew about the leak and Victor's cover-up. This is comprehensive documentation, Torres said, studying my photos. How long have you been monitoring this situation? 3 months since I first discovered it. But Victor has been hiding it and falsifying reports the entire time. Kim looked up from his notepad. You mentioned maintenance logs. Do you have access to the employee who created these reports? I hesitated. Giving them Marcus's name would protect him under whistleblower laws, but it would also end his career at Harris Industrial. Then I remembered the poisoned creek and made the choice. Marcus Rodriguez. He's been documenting everything because Victor ordered him to monitor instead of repair. He has 15 years of service and a spotless record. He'll tell you the truth. Torres nodded grimly. We'll need his testimony for our investigation. Ms. Pierce, what you've uncovered here isn't just an environmental violation. This level of deliberate contamination could result in federal criminal charges. The EPA moved with surprising speed. Within 48 hours, they had secured emergency inspection warrants and assembled a full environmental response team. But they kept everything quiet, planning a surprise inspection that would catch Victor before he could destroy evidence or attempt temporary fixes. Marcus called me the night before the inspection, his voice tight with nervousness. They're coming tomorrow morning, aren't they? I can't say anything specific, but you need to be ready to tell the truth. Lauren, Victor's been acting strange lately. He's been having private meetings with the lawyers and spending a lot of time in the contaminated area. I think he knows something's coming. My blood went cold. If Victor suspected an investigation, he might try to destroy evidence or blame the whole situation on someone else. Someone like me. Marcus, whatever happens tomorrow, stick to the facts. You documented everything properly. The truth will protect you. But as I hung up the phone, I wondered if the truth would be enough to protect any of us from Victor's desperation. The surprise inspection happened at dawn. I wasn't there, but Marcus called me afterward with a blow-by-blow account. EPA agents in hazmat suits had swarmed the facility at 6 a.m., just as the day shift was arriving. They sealed off the contaminated area immediately and began taking soil and water samples while Victor ranted about warrants and lawyers. You should have seen his face when they showed him your photos, Marcus said, his voice mixing admiration with fear. He went white as a sheet. Then he started screaming about industrial espionage and corporate sabotage. The agents had found exactly what my reports promised, a massive chemical leak that had been contaminating the groundwater for months. The toxin levels were even higher than Marcus's logs indicated, suggesting the situation had deteriorated rapidly in recent weeks. They shut down the entire production line, Marcus continued. Sent everyone home except essential personnel. Victor was locked in his office with lawyers, but I could hear him yelling through the walls. The environmental team worked for 12 hours, documenting every aspect of the contamination. By evening, local news crews had arrived, drawn by tips from my anonymous reports to journalists. The story was spreading. The news broke like a dam bursting. Chemical leak threatens local water supply dominated the evening news, with reporters standing outside Harris Industrial as environmental crews worked in the background. The story had everything journalists loved: corporate corruption, environmental danger, and a community at risk. I watched from my living room as Victor faced the cameras for the first time since the investigation began. His usual polished appearance was cracked, his silver hair disheveled and his suit wrinkled. When reporters asked about the leak, he read from a prepared statement about minor maintenance issues and isolated incidents. But the EPA wasn't playing along with his spin. Agent Torres held her own press conference, displaying enlarged photos of the contamination and explaining the threat to public health. The contrast was stark: Victor's defensive denials versus federal agents showing clear evidence of environmental damage. Based on our investigation, Torres announced, this contamination has been ongoing for months, with clear evidence of systematic cover-up by company management. We are treating this as a potential criminal matter. That night, my phone started ringing. Reporters had somehow traced the anonymous tips back to me, and they wanted my story. I declined all interviews, but I felt a savage satisfaction knowing that Victor's empire was crumbling. The lawsuit started within days. Environmental groups filed injunctions to shut down the factory permanently. Residents near Miller Creek filed class action suits for property damage and health impacts. The state attorney general opened a criminal investigation into Victor's falsification of safety records. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: Harris Industrial's own board of directors. They had been kept in the dark about the contamination, and when the EPA evidence revealed the scope of Victor's deception, they moved quickly to protect the company. Marcus called with the news. Emergency board meeting yesterday. They stripped Victor of all authority and put him on administrative leave pending the investigation. The new interim CEO is someone named Patricia Wolf from corporate headquarters. Within hours, Patricia Wolf held her own press conference. Unlike Victor's defensive posturing, she took full responsibility for the company's failures and announced a comprehensive remediation plan. More importantly, she offered to cooperate fully with all investigations. The previous management's handling of this situation was unacceptable, she stated clearly. We will make this right, regardless of the cost. It was the accountability Victor had never shown, but it came too late to save his career. 3 weeks after the EPA inspection, I received an unexpected phone call from Patricia Wolf herself. She wanted to meet in person, and despite my wariness, I agreed. We met at the same coffee shop where I had first spoken with the EPA agents, and her directness surprised me. Ms. Pierce, I want to apologize for how you were treated, she began without preamble. I've reviewed your employment records and the circumstances of your termination. It was retaliation, pure and simple. She slid a folder across the table. Harris Industrial would like to offer you your job back, with full back pay and a promotion to senior safety coordinator. We need people who put safety above politics. The offer was tempting: more money, better position, vindication. But as I looked at her earnest face, I realized that going back would feel like defeat. I had outgrown Harris Industrial. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I think my time there is over. However, I do want to ensure that Marcus Rodriguez is protected. He risked everything to help expose this situation. Wolf nodded. Mr. Rodriguez will be promoted to Environmental Safety Manager, with a significant raise. His courage deserves recognition. At least something good would come from this nightmare. The criminal charges against Victor came down like thunder. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case using my evidence, Marcus's testimony, and the EPA's investigation. Grand jury indictments included falsifying federal safety documents, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to defraud regulatory agencies, and criminal environmental contamination. I watched the news coverage of his arrest with grim satisfaction. The man who had humiliated me for taking a sick day was now facing 20 years in federal prison. The image of him in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his silver hair disheveled, was worth every sleepless night I had spent documenting his crimes. The environmental cleanup would take years and cost millions of dollars. Families near Miller Creek were relocated while soil contamination was addressed. The creek itself was declared a temporary environmental hazard zone. But the immediate threat was contained, and no one else would drink poisoned water because of Victor's greed. Jake asked me why I looked so serious watching the news. How do you explain corporate crime to an 8-year-old? I settled for a simple truth: sometimes adults make bad choices that hurt other people. But there are good adults who make sure the bad choices have consequences. A month later, I sat in the offices of EcoShield Environmental Consulting, interviewing for a position that seemed almost too good to be true. They had contacted me after reading about my role in exposing the Harris industrial contamination. The company specialized in helping corporations maintain environmental compliance, exactly the kind of work that could prevent future disasters. Your background is exactly what we need, explained hiring manager James Wheeler. Someone who understands both the technical and ethical aspects of environmental safety. Someone who won't be intimidated by corporate pressure. The salary was nearly double what I had made at Harris Industrial, with full benefits and a relocation package. But more importantly, the work had meaning. I would be helping companies do the right thing, preventing the kind of contamination that Victor had hidden. There's one thing you should know, I told Wheeler honestly. I won't hesitate to report violations, even from our own clients. My integrity isn't for sale. He smiled. Ms. Pierce, that's exactly why we want to hire you. Within a week, I had signed the contract. Jake was excited about our move to the state capital, where EcoShield was headquartered. A new city, a new job, a new life built on truth instead of lies. 6 months later, I testified at Victor's criminal trial. The federal courthouse was packed with reporters, environmental activists, and Harris Industrial employees who had come to see justice served. Victor sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his face hollow and aged beyond his years. My testimony was clinical and factual. I described discovering the leak, reporting it to Victor, and documenting his systematic cover-up. The prosecutor walked me through each piece of evidence, the photos, the falsified reports, the cost estimate with Victor's damning note. Ms. Pierce, the prosecutor asked, in your professional opinion, what would have happened if this contamination had continued unchecked? I looked directly at Victor as I answered. People would have died. The toxins were heading directly for the municipal water supply. Children would have developed neurological damage. Pregnant women would have suffered miscarriages. The cancer rates in the entire region would have skyrocketed. Victor's lawyer tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the evidence spoke for itself. When the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all counts, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. Victor Halden was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $50 million in restitution to affected communities. The judge's words echoed through the courthouse. Corporate executives who prioritize profit over public safety must face the full consequences of their actions. Harris Industrial ultimately survived under new management, but the company was forever changed. Patricia Wolf implemented comprehensive safety protocols and transparency measures. Marcus Rodriguez became something of a hero, speaking at environmental conferences about the importance of worker whistleblowing protections. As for me, my new career at EcoShield was everything I had hoped for. I traveled the country helping companies navigate environmental regulations and avoid the mistakes that had destroyed Victor. My clients respected my expertise and valued my honesty, a far cry from the toxic culture at Harris Industrial. Jake thrived in our new city, making friends and excelling in school. Sometimes he would ask about our old life, and I would tell him that we had moved to a place where people valued truth over convenience. It was a lesson I hoped he would never forget. A year after Victor's conviction, I received an unexpected letter at my EcoShield office. The return address showed it was from the federal prison where Victor was serving his sentence. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten on standard prison stationery, and Victor's usually perfect penmanship was shaky and uncertain. He wrote about the impact of his actions, the families he had hurt, and the legacy of contamination that would outlast him. But he also wrote about me. "Lauren, you were right to expose what I was hiding. I told myself I was protecting jobs and profits, but I was really just protecting my own pride. Your courage saved lives, and my cowardice endangered them. I deserved everything that happened to me." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. I folded the letter carefully and filed it away. Not because I forgave him, but because it reminded me that even the most powerful people could fall when their lies caught up with them. The last line stayed with me: "You proved that doing the right thing is always worth the risk." 2 years after leaving Harris Industrial, I was promoted to Senior Environmental Compliance Director at EcoShield. My work had helped dozens of companies avoid environmental disasters, and my reputation in the industry was built on uncompromising integrity. The girl who had been fired for taking a sick day was now one of the most respected environmental consultants in the region. On a warm spring afternoon, I drove past the old Harris Industrial site with Jake in the passenger seat. The factory had been partially demolished and converted into a renewable energy research facility. The yellow smoke was gone, replaced by clean air and green technology. Miller Creek ran clear again, and families had returned to fish in its waters. "Mom," Jake asked as we drove past, "is that where you used to work?" "Yes," I replied, slowing down so he could see the transformation. "That's where I learned that telling the truth is more important than keeping a job." He nodded seriously, processing this lesson in his 8-year-old way. As we drove toward home, I realized that everything we had gained was worth everything we had lost. Victor had tried to silence me with shame and poverty, but he had actually freed me to become someone better. Now, as I sit in my bright corner office at EcoShield, I keep a small framed photo on my desk. It's not of Jake or family, it's a picture of Miller Creek running clear and clean, taken 1 year after the contamination was finally eliminated. It reminds me every day why I do this work. Victor fired me for taking 1 sick day, claiming I was unreliable and uncommitted. He had no idea that his cruelty would unleash someone who would bring down his entire empire of lies. He thought he was disposing of a problem employee, but he was actually creating his worst nightmare, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Sometimes people ask me if I regret speaking up, knowing the risk I took with Jake's security and my own future. The answer is always the same: I regret staying silent for as long as I did. Every day I waited was another day that poison seeped into the ground and threatened innocent people. The truth has a power that corporate executives like Victor never understand. You can fire a whistleblower, you can discredit their reputation, you can threaten their livelihood. But you cannot make the truth disappear. And sometimes, just sometimes, the truth is strong enough to bring down kings. Victor learned that lesson from a federal prison cell. I learned it from the clarity that comes with doing what's right, regardless of